Thanks for joining. We're going to once again delve into diet dogmas, and remember that the complete book will be coming out relatively soon. And so when we start talking about diet dogmas, what we're really talking about is a host of various dietary styles that lead to types of restrictions and types of inclusions that we can think about in terms of various types of religious practices. These are a lot of the dietary styles, a lot of dietary restrictions, a lot of dietary inclusions that develop into a lot of the fad diets that we think about when we think about diets. And so paleo diets, what is it, what it isn't, and should I use it? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy!
So what is the paleo diet? The paleo diet is a dietary philosophy that is focused on what we think a Paleolithic human would have eaten for their diet, based off of the idea that we're going to be eating a lot of raw or natural things, such as fish, steak, shellfish, poultry, vegetables, nuts, fruits, berries, and eggs. The idea is that this type of diet is going to counteract a lot of the nutritional deficiencies that might come about through eating a modern diet or eating from fast food restaurants that can lead to a host of problems, such as obesity issues, along with metabolic issues coming about through the consumption of various types of fast food or processed foods. But what does the evidence say? What is the idea that surrounds the Paleolithic diet or the paleo diet, sometimes referred to as the caveman diet? And does it actually hold true when we start looking at the evidence? Which remembers that most of the recommendations that we are going to be providing from a paleo diet is coming from analysis of modern hunter and gatherer associations, hunter and gatherer groups, not necessarily what might have been consumed during Paleolithic times. We also have to remember that a lot of the foods that we're going to consider to be paleo are actually modern in their derivations. A lot of the benefits that we're going to look at are not universal. And there is some question as to whether or not the benefits that we see coming from the diets are coming from the diet or coming from other things. So what do we know that comes out in terms of benefits? We do know that there is some benefits that come about from following a Paleolithic dietary practice or paleo diet or a caveman diet. A lot of these benefits are similar to the benefits that we see coming from things like intermittent fasting, a very low carbohydrate diet, as well as with a plant-rich diet. Things like increased insulin sensitivity and neuroplasticity within the nervous system, and a reduction in ROS damage. An increase in metabolic flexibility, an increase in insulin sensitivity, an increase in lipolysis, breakdown of lipids, and an increase in anabolism, growing of tissues, within the musculoskeletal system. Within the cardiovascular system, this is where we start seeing a lot of differences that might come about where we don't see universally one direction in terms of changes, where we will see a change in compliance, a change in cardiac function, a change in atherosclerosis, and a change in inflammation. That is highly questionable in terms of its root benefit coming from the diet, as opposed to other lifestyle changes. Within adipose tissue, we do see an increase in insulin sensitivity, an increase in lipolysis, the breakdown of lipids, as well as a change in adipokine signaling and macrophage signaling. Changes in adipokine signaling, changes in the hormone signals coming from the adipose tissue, as well as changes in macrophage activation, lead to changes in inflammation that may lead to the reduction in ROS damage and the reduction in inflammation that we see throughout the body for people who follow a Paleolithic diet. In terms of pancreas functions, we do see a normalization of insulin and glucagon levels for those individuals who happen to have metabolic issues, metabolic syndrome, or type 2 diabetes that follow a paleo diet. But once again, it is not universal and may be associated with changes in activity, as well as other lifestyle interventions. In terms of liver functions, once again, we do see some questionable responses coming out of liver functions. However, for those who follow a paleo diet that is reducing, has the reduction in or reduces the consumption of a lot of the sugars, in a lot of the grains. We will see an increase in ketone formation due to a change in metabolic functions towards lipid utilization and ketogenic processes. As with all the other insulin sensitive tissues, we will see an increase in insulin sensitivity. Due to the reduction in sugar loads and in carbohydrate loads, we will see an increase in ROS clearance, as well as a changing in the non-alcoholic fatty acid liver issues within the liver for people who have metabolic issues, and change diet to follow a paleo diet. Well, that's all well and good. What about the entirety of the research? We did say that there was some questionable and some responses that were not universally founded. And so the question comes about is, does it automatically mean a healthier food in our diet? Is our diet automatically healthier because we are going to be eating more unprocessed foods, at least that's the claim, or eating things that are more in line with what we would have had in Paleolithic times, closer to what some people refer to as ancestral human diets. The problem is that a lot of the claims about ancestral human diet is going to ignore a lot of the evolutionary processes that have happened within human history. And so if we look at a lot of the evidence that's out there, is it actually safer? Do we actually have evidence to show that the paleo diet is worth all of the hype that we tend to attribute to it? And this is where, once again, just like with all the other diets, we have to go back and say, well, we're going to have deficiencies. And we're going to have deficiencies because we're going to be cutting out things from the diet. Based off of how we go about setting up the paleo diet, we could be deficient in various vitamins, such as vitamin B, in particular folate, as well as vitamin C and vitamin D, as well as some other antioxidants. We could have ion deficiencies such as calcium, iron, iodine, magnesium, psyllium, and sodium. Notice there's a question mark on the sodium deficiency, and that depends upon what type of meats we're going to be eating and how we go about seasoning the meats. However, with the reduction in dairy consumption, we do run the risk of having calcium deficiency as well as vitamin D deficiency. With the reduction in grain consumption, we do risk having vitamin B deficiencies coming about, in particular the folate, but also with the niacins. We will also see a change in psychological drive for food more in a paleo diet than in many of the other diets, simply because of the excessive labeling of good food versus bad food. Because of the lower consumption of vegetables in some of the diets, this is going to be very similar to what we see with a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. We do run the risk of diet-induced metabolic acidosis. The other thing we have to worry about based off of the type of foods that we're eating in terms of getting our proteins, our fats, and our carbohydrates is an excessive load of animal saturated fat, animal antigens, and cholesterol issues. The animal antigen and cholesterol issues can lead to an actual increase in atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, as well as cardiovascular disease. Based off of the type of animals that we're going to be eating within the paleo diet, we could see a hypersaturation of saturated fats, meaning we're going to have large amounts of saturated fats relative to our polyunsaturated fats, our PUFAs, and our monounsaturated fats, our MUFAs. Based off of the source of the animal protein, we could see altered fat metabolism and fat absorption taking place, as well as altered cholesterol metabolism within the liver, which could lead to increased levels of circulating LDLs within the body. So one of the things we have to address within the idea about the paleo diet is it actually truly close to the Paleolithic diet? That is it actually historically close to what we would think of as a Paleolithic diet? And once again, what we're looking at is we're looking at dietary practices that are closer to hunter-gatherer practices than actual Paleolithic practices, mainly because the foods that we're eating have evolved with us evolving. The other thing is that a lot of the ideas around the Paleolithic diet kind of goes to the GIF at the very beginning of the discussion in terms of the Flintstones, is that we misrepresent what actually is historically accurate in terms of our dietary practices 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago. As we were doing a lot of cultivating, we're doing a lot of agricultural cultivation and domestication taking place, which means a lot of the foods that we think about as being modern aren't actually modern. They're more Paleolithic than we actually attribute in terms of their sourcing. But the other thing is that just like with all other diets, we start having mass-produced issues. We start having things that are becoming processed, things that are having chemical additives within it, things that can and do act like metabolic disruptors, which means that we run the risk of having metabolic disruption taking place from following a paleo diet, very similar to following a lot of the other diets that we think about as having health benefits to it based off of the way in which it's being sold to us. And so if we start looking at the underlying issues coming into the Paleolithic diet, it's not as clear-cut as what we would hope it would be based off of how the chemicals and how the nutrients and how all of the processing takes place, particularly for the mass-produced paleo-labeled foods. If we're to follow a paleo diet based off of the use of meats and vegetables and nuts and berries and fruits without purchasing the mass-produced foods, we will lower the risk of having metabolic disruption within there. However, based off of the percentages that we see in terms of consumptions, where there is a wide range in what is being advertised or advised in terms of consumption of macronutrients, we could still have metabolic disruption taking place based off of following a paleo diet. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully got a little bit out of the discussion. Please remember that this is going to be a further discussion with a lot more intricacy within the book as we go through the pros and cons and discuss what is the totality of the science evidence that we have for following that specific diet. Please make sure that you are subscribed. Please make sure you're sharing out and liking what we're putting out there. It will help us out with all the metrics. And make sure you're following us on all of the various platforms that we're publishing on.